So I'm Donna Frazier. I'm Senior VP of Privacy Initiatives here at BBB National Programs and still the Director of the Children's Advertiser Review Unit, CARU as well. Today's session, Safety by Design, Protecting Users of Innovative Mobile Apps. I just want to go through a few housekeeping items. Obviously, this is the fourth session, so thank you for attending. All of your mics are muted. The session will be recorded and will be available online. You'll receive an email afterwards. And if at any time during this session you need technical help, please email support@bbbnp.org. Here is the list of the upcoming sessions. This session today is the last in our summer series. We kick off our fall series in September with Copley Ever After, which is presently scheduled for September 22nd, and it's free to all attendees. And then we have our October, November, and December sessions, dates TBD. Obviously, these events would not be possible without our sponsors, so I would like to specifically thank all of our sponsors: Google, Hypershift, Keller and Heckman, Microsoft, SuperAwesome, Venable, Manat, Baker Hostetler, and last but certainly not least, Davis and Gilbert. So at this time, I'm going to turn the panel over to Kate O'Loughlin at SuperAwesome, Safety by Design, Protecting Users of Innovative Mobile Apps.
Great, thanks Donna, and thanks to the whole CARU team for continuing to bring great content to everyone. I wish we could all be in person in LA, but this series is going really, really well. So as Donna said, I'm Kate O'Loughlin, and I'm very pleased to be joined with Rachel and David today to talk about safety and mobile apps and the mobile experience, building and marketing for it. I'm coming from the perspective of a kid tech provider. David's here as an operator of a social platform, and Rachel's here coming from an advertising agency. So we've got some really diverse perspectives, and I think it's going to be a really great conversation. But to kick it off and orient ourselves, I just want to talk about sort of why we have to care so much about building for safety as a guiding principle when thinking about mobile experiences and mobile apps and kids. And we'll start off with a few stats. So if you want to go to the next slide for me. I think it's no surprise to everyone to say that kids' consumption, where they get their entertainment time, has gone digital. So the picture we have here is the decline in GRPs and gross rating points for kids as compared to the general US populations. What we're seeing here is that kids are the ones who are fleeing sort of good old traditional TV faster than the general population. And it's not that kids' overall screen time has decreased with their decrease in TV time. In fact, we see that their overall screen time has effectively increased. If you want to go to the next slide. In fact, we saw during the pandemic that when we asked kids directly, has your screen time increased? And they all said resounding yes. You know, it's not that they're spending any less time in front of a screen, it's just the screen has changed, and it's gone digital and it's gone mobile. And if you want to go to the next screen, we'll see that phones are the place where kids spend their time. It's one of the biggest devices in the mix of where they're spending their hours in the day. And it was sort of a shocking stat to me, frankly, when Common Sense Media said that over almost 69% of kids own their own phone by the age of 12. It's not that they have access to a phone, it's that they own one themselves by the time they're 12. And when we ask kids, where you're spending your time or how much time are you spending on a phone on an average weekend day, you know, lion's share of them are several hours a day. So what the data is telling us, of course, is that kids are spending their screen time on mobile. That's where they want to spend their time. That's the environment that they want to be in. Those are the apps they want, their place where they want to spend their time is in mobile apps. So that leads us to this conversation today of what do we need to consider when building great experiences, mobile experiences, or marketing on mobile devices to kids. So the three of us are going to take some time to talk about it from our different perspectives. And at the end, we're going to have about 20 minutes, 15 minutes or so of panel questions, and we'll certainly take questions from the group here. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat, and then Donna will bring them to us at the end. But David, do you want to kick us off here? What has Snap done to account for youth audiences?
Sure. Thanks, Kate. Hi, everybody. I am David Rothenberg. I'm an associate general counsel at Snap Inc. We are the owners and operators of the Snapchat app. And just to be clear, Snapchat is for 13 and up. So our users are above the age of 13. Below the age, it is prohibited to be a user of Snapchat, and they cannot register and become a Snapchat user. But no surprise, Snap spends a ton of time thinking about that 13 and up demographic, and our young users are some of our most core and power users. So if you could go to the next slide. What I'm going to talk about today is what I think is a pretty unique safety by design process that Snap has. And I'm fortunate as one of the lawyers, and specifically as the product counsel, to be deeply embedded in this process. And I spend most of my days working with our product, engineering, design, marketing, trust and safety teams on features and functionality before they've launched. So safety by design, in terms of our history at Snapchat, one thing that has actually helped make the process as effective as it is and really has led to where it's evolved today was really early on in Snap's life. Snap entered a consent decree with the FTC. So this was around 2014. There were no lawyers in-house at the time. There were probably under 100 employees. And we had this consent decree with the FTC. And one prong of Snap's commitments that was part of the consent decree was this pre-launch review process. At the time, the focus was around privacy and user data. But from that process, which when I started, 5 years ago at Snap, and I inherited this, there was already buy-in on this pre-launch review process. We've been able to layer other things on top of it. So privacy by design, safety by design, all have really been plugged into this entrenched process. In this first bullet, I think I can't emphasize enough how much that collaborative cross-functional nature is. At no point am I, as the legal partner on it, feeling like I don't look at my role as a policeman. It is a partner, and a robust safety by design process doesn't work without that company-wide buy-in. Another thing that really dovetails with that is the high-level buy-in on company principles. So we did this with regard to privacy and safety, where at a very generic level, we have, from the business and product side, along with legal and trust and safety, really agreed on various principles that we then apply to more specific products. And the principles aren't just what is within the letter of the law. So I think a fun part of my job is, sure, I could provide feedback on legal risk and all that, but it's also what is in the best interests for our users, what supports the well-being and safety of our users. So even if something is legally permissible, does it promote the well-being? Does it protect our users? So that's kind of the principles help flush through that and help at least provide a structure for conversations when we're getting into the nitty-gritty of any particular product review. And then, Snap has a wide spectrum of different types of products, from things in the app to our connected sunglasses product. And different products require different specifics and rules, and those evolve over time as products evolve. So it's this interesting interplay between the high level conceptual buy-in and what are more specific nuances with the products. And there has to be a degree of flexibility with everything. And if we go to the next slide. So what's also essential to making the safety by design process work is the infrastructure for that process. So we have a bunch of different kind of software review tools that are integrated with one another. And those, we it provides a very quick, easy kind of lingo and framework for saying, hey, for being able to check at what stage is any review in and where do we need to go to finalize that review. So we've spent just a lot of time and energy to develop our own bespoke tools and to make sure that it's integrated into the tools that the engineering teams and design teams are using. And similarly, we have really comprehensive education and training. So whenever there's a new hire, they on the engineering or product management team, they're going through this educational process in their first week and their first month to learn about what our process is, what Snap cares about. I teach one of these trainings, and it's not just like a one and done. We have a series of things that allow our new team members to get up to speed. And this is also where just like the culture helps, that team members with more tenure, so you have an engineer that's, been on the team a long time, is able to also teach and train in a more casual fashion the new hires. And also, we've done a ton of work with outside experts. So like with Donna and her amazing team at CARU, if you check out the Snap parent guide for children's safety, you could see we've partnered over the years with a lot of different outside experts to get that perspective and feedback and incorporate it into our products and principles. And this last one is I think really, really valuable, and I can't emphasize it enough, is that it doesn't end, even though we, safety by design, it doesn't end after we've designed and even after we've launched the thing. There's a ton of iteration based on what's actually happening when a product is launched in the wild. So in this side of things, the partnership with our platform integrity and trust and safety teams is essential, because they are the experts on hearing what and seeing what different things are going on with the products, and whether they're seeing comments on Twitter or in-app reporting or direct contact from our users. That feedback flows back, to me on the product council side of things, to our product teams, to help actually inform what are the risks, what are the tweaks necessary to enhance safety. And that aspect of safety by design really closes the loop and is essential too. So at a high level, that's the general process and thought behind what Snap does. And, I'm going to kick it back to Kate, who I think is going to talk about how SuperAwesome helps companies connect with under 13s and how they approach safety and mobile experiences.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, we, as I mentioned before, KidTech is SuperAwesome is a KidTech provider, which means we're helping companies who want to engage with kids, build experiences for them, market to them or monetize them, do so compliantly and safely. And, our kind of overarching position is that we want more companies to be able to say yes to building for kids, building for the under 13 or under 16, depending on, if it's a European company, so that kids aren't kind of forced into deeper, darker parts of the internet, or, encourage or incentivize to kind of not to be honest with who they really are. So what we're trying to do is bring the infrastructure and the products so that you can get to yes with kids. And, David, they've got a really rich process and team and kind of structure in place for being able to discuss openly how they're going to put safety in at the foundation of building products. But when we go into companies, some of them aren't there yet, or they need some help or a little push along the way. So if you want to go to the next slide, when we go into organizations, we often have to sort of help the development team or help the product help team sort of objectively assess their product and who are their users, even if they don't necessarily want them to be kids. Do they honestly think that kids are probably going to show up and congregate there, and how are they going to handle that? And how are they going to handle data collection and their data uses? And a lot of the times, we're at the very beginning of our conversations and our engagement with companies, we try to help them understand, like, do you need to have the data to make your experience great? start with the user and start with what do you think they would really want to play or what they want to do, and work back from, okay, what data do you actually have in order to make that work? Or can it still be a rich experience without the data, and really get the teams to understand what's the minimal amount of data that they need and what's the value exchange in going back to ask for consent to get it if they decide that they really do need a piece of personal or identifying data from a likely child user. And that concept of value exchange recently has become something that like conjures a lot of conversation, because it's value exchange when we talk about going to the user, to the player, to the kid, potential kid, and say, you know, do you agree that this is the kind of data we're going to collect for you so that you can unlock this cool part of the experience, or have this kind of personalized engagement with our company. But then it's also value exchange back to the parent. Once the kid says, oh man, I really got to have it, I really want to do it, this sounds so fun and cool, like, are they going to be able to translate that to mom or dad to get their parent through a whole consent flow? Is there enough value exchange for the parent too to get through all the hoops that necessarily come with getting VPC? So a lot of the conversation we go and have with teams, and maybe this is something you can take away to your own organizations, is like having this upfront conversation of start with the user. What experience do we want to build? How can we make it cool and engaging and embracing of as many people, including kids, as possible? And then think about the value exchange when it comes to data collection and data usage. And it's helpful, if you want to go to the next slide, to think about like, what are the cool things that kids want to do? So kids, you know, if you're a developer, or if you're a product creator, or even if you're creating like a marketing experience, a marketing moment with an audience, you know, talking about, well, do we want to have an augmented reality component? If I'm building an app, do I want to send out push notifications to get the users back in and spend more time with our experience? Start with the features and say, what would we like to be able to do? And then talk about what kind of data would we have to make that work? And is there enough value exchange to go and collect it and get the right kind of consent? So what we're trying to do, and maybe this is something you take back to your organizations, is like, imagine a product manager and a whiteboard writing down all their crazy ideas and the things that they want to build, and try to let them kind of get through that process rather than wiping everything off because they're afraid that just because they might have a kid that they can't do cool things. So that's what we're trying to do at SuperAwesome, is help kind of educate and get people there, and then also provide them the infrastructure to be able to get consent or not. And getting that consent, as I said, is definitely about getting the user engaged, the player engaged, but you have to think about the parent too. And so if you want to go to the next slide, one of the things that we've learned along the way here in enabling rich features and rich things that require consent to be built is that you have to think about the parent's flow too, and how you're going to involve the parent as part of the conversation, and how can you bring transparency to the parent of the player too. So here's just some things that we've built in our kind of prototype or example, I should say, consent flows. And what we have found in experimenting and trying to maximize the number of parents who can say yes and get through that consent flow is that they really value understanding clearly, what are you, why are you collecting data, and what does that mean my kid can do in your game or on your website? And giving parents choice to say, yes, my kid is ready for this, no, my kid isn't ready for it, instead of just presenting it as, here's a big list of, here's our privacy policy, sign up for it, and we're just going to then carry on and do the thing. Instead, try to use it as an opportunity to create a connection with the parent. Let the parent say, yes, my kid is ready to get push notifications on their phone, but maybe they're not ready yet to provide their location to meet up with people in the real world, if it was like an augmented reality type of example. So giving parents some part to play in the experience of the game, we have found to be an important step in if you do need to collect data and you do need to get consent, to get the right number of parents and kids actually through the flow. And you're often rewarded by the parent being quite loyal because they appreciate that transparency, and they appreciate that relationship with the company too, and not just relying on the kid maybe as a player. So when we talk about creating big cool, rich mobile games or experiences. Again, we're trying to get to companies to say yes to features, yes to cool things so kids can be included, and involving parents too. But a lot of the conversation then becomes, okay, product manager, you have built this thing, it's really cool, and now you want to tell the world about it. Now you need to do some marketing around it. And they think, oh, okay, well, we've got consent. That means that now we can do all this really rich marketing that might be behavioral, or we might be able to like really talk to an individual user about how cool this game is going to be. But if you go to the next slide, building a mobile experience with the right kind of consent, we have to remind teams, doesn't mean that you can take that consent in the use case of marketing. And we still think that marketing is a place where you don't need to have kids' personal information. You don't need to go down or you shouldn't try to go down the path of getting parental consent, because in this use case, there really is rarely the right kind of value exchange. You're really rarely going to be able to get both a kid to be excited about and a parent be excited about saying yes to collecting my data for the purposes of advertising. So in most cases, we're going and talking to teams and getting the developers and the marketers of those products that have been developed to take a zero data approach to their advertising, a zero personal data approach to advertising. You can just do contextual advertising instead. You can make sure you pay attention to the creative and get that right and make that cool, but it doesn't need to be data driven. So when, from our perspective as a kid tech provider, there's really two paths you can take is if I've got the right kind of a value exchange with the player and the parent, then it makes sense to go out and get parental consent and do so transparently. But also, it's certainly a valid path to go down for a zero data approach if you don't have that right value exchange, or especially the cases of marketing. So that's been our experience as a kid tech provider on the marketing side. But Rachel, you know, you're coming out of an ad agency. It'd be great to hear your perspective on marketing to youth audiences and what it takes to do that right.
Great, thanks, Kate, and to both you and David for some wonderful insights. I've got some big shoes to follow here and to fill, but I'm going to talk a little bit about what to think about from a marketing or an agency perspective when it comes to having children as a target audience, or when you're working with children's products. So if we can move to the next slide, please. This is sort of a heavy way to start on this part of the conversation, but I think it's really one of the most critical aspects when you think about marketing to children and collection of data. And I think Kate raised a lot of really great points about a value exchange and doing things in a transparent manner, engaging the parent. And David talked about, engaging with your teams internally and working in a collaborative fashion. And I think always at the center and the focus of those, brands and companies, marketers alike, need to really think about, I'm legally allowed to, but should I? Is it the right thing to do? And I think you start to have this sort of convergence and like this overarching overlap between ethical considerations, what is permissible under law, and really, what are you getting out of it, right? So I would like us to all kind of just think about a couple of key themes as we go through the next few slides, and as I talk a little bit more about some things to look out for and some channels that you can leverage within a marketing context. So when you're thinking about whether or not you should move forward with a program or a marketing strategy or a campaign, I think the first thing really to think about is how, if this were my kid, how would I feel as a parent if they saw this? I think the other thing always to think about is, you just don't trick kids. They're clever, they're smart, and parents should really be engaged in what they're doing online. Totally separate topic about that as well, but it's really a collaborative effort amongst all parts: parents, children, brands, agencies. Everyone sort of has a role to play in trying to keep kids safe when it comes to the internet and online. So don't trick kids, and don't try to trick parents into getting to the kids. The other thing I would say is don't target inappropriate products. So don't target adult products to children. Very often a strategy might be to target parents with a kid's product. After all, parents are the ones with the buying power, right? Although kids do have that nagging power, which is pretty effective, as most parents would probably agree. But don't target, adult products to children and vice versa. If you're targeting an adult with a kid's product, make sure that the ad is tasteful and appropriate. Very often adults we see a lot of digital ads, we see a lot of television ads, postal mailings of things that are just, they could be quite funny, but they're also very inappropriate. And I think there are a few topics you just need to stay away from when it comes to children. Whether you think it's funny or not, there are just certain things when it comes to children that are not funny. So definitely be mindful about what's appropriate and what's not, and who your target audience is. And then I would certainly highlight considering the risks, the practical risks. So again, while you legally can, think about what some of the practical risks might be for a design of a certain product or collection and flow of certain data. So for example, there was an enforcement action against a toy company that manufactured bears, and children were able to record a message in the bear to their parents and vice versa. And it sounds pretty innocent, it sounds really fun, a great way for kids to connect with their parents if the parent travels a lot. But what happened was there was a data hack and a leakage. And the next thing you know, you have all of these children's names out there on the internet. And it may seem fairly benign, and it's just a name, but I think what we fail to remember very often is that there comes a risk with that. Not only a risk to the child's data, right? Now you have a name, and if you're a real bad actor, you can sort of mine for all of these other data points and put it all together. I think the other issue that we often also don't think about is the physical safety of a child, right? Children are enticed very easily. If, we always tell children, don't put your names on your backpacks, or don't walk around with a name tag on, don't talk to strangers, that sort of thing. And if strangers know your name, it's easier to be enticed by them and engage in a conversation. So there are a lot of dangers that could be lurking from a simple leakage as just a name. And in addition to that, the company, the bear manufacturer, had to worry about the reputational risk. Not only was this a data leakage, but this was a data leakage about children's data. And that's a little bit more of a hard pill to swallow, I think, than just a regular sort of, our names got out there type of thing. So these are just some things to really be mindful of when you think about, is this a good idea and should we move forward with this? Next slide, please. So I don't want to make it all doom and gloom. Of course, there's a lot we can do around marketing to children. Again, as long as we're taking some of these considerations into account. Kate showed us some really great activities and functionality in their products that, make certain things possible for children. She showed us some great stats earlier on in the presentation as well that highlight the reality that nearly 3/4 of children own their own phones, right? Which is a tremendous number. And I think the bottom line is kids go online whether we want them to, or like it, or know it, or not. They are savvy, and they are smart, and they will find ways to participate in the internet environment. So with that, and we should engage them, right? Shutting them out of these things is not necessarily the right way to protect them. So we should do these things accordingly and carefully. So if you do want to market to children, but you're a little wary of collecting personal information, there are certain things that you can do that will keep you in sort of a safe realm. So for example, contextual advertising. For those of you who don't know, contextual advertising is where your ad will appear based on the content of the web page the user is looking at, and not necessarily based on past behavioral Browsing behavior analytics data and performance data are okay. So using identifiers for supportive internal operations is okay as long as there's no other personal information collected. And this is so you can get a sense of how kids are engaging on your website. So you don't need to know that Rachel Glasser was engaging with this page or this feature or that function, or that I watched the entire length of the video. But it would be helpful to know that the majority of the children visitors to your website do in fact do that. So just some things for thought. You can do analytics, performance marketing, click-throughs, impressions, things like that. What you do not want to do is you do not want to do behavioral targetings or interest-based advertising. This will be a high bar to get some consent for, even verifiable parental consent. And there's a mixed bag of sort of sentiment about whether or not targeting a children's behavior online to target them with advertisement is appropriate. So I would suggest staying away from behavioral targeting. In addition to that, as just a side note, I think many of us are familiar with the Digital Advertising Alliance and the ad choices icon, the little blue triangle with a little person in it that is supposed to signify when data is either being collected for interest-based advertising or your ad is being served based on past data collected. Just an item to note, many agencies, trading desks, technology platforms have gotten into a habit of putting this logo on every piece of ad creative that they traffic through their platforms or systems, and whether it's behaviorally targeting or not. And I think the challenge that comes with there, it's done as part of a safety mechanism to make sure that they're being covered. But one thing I do just kind of want to bring to everyone's attention is that if you have ads that are quote unquote targeted to children, they should not be engaging in behavioral targeting and therefore should not have an ad choices icon. So you just want to be mindful of that. And if you are working with an ad server or a company that may, as sort of a value add or just as part of their overall compliance structure, as a matter of practice, puts the icon on everything, you want to be mindful that it is not appearing on children's ads that might appear on children's websites, because then you might have explaining and problems where you normally would not. Additionally, you want to stay away from email marketing and retargeting to children. And of course, those behavioral targeting and email marketing usually tend to feed into profiling, where you can build a profile about an individual and an audience segment and then push it out programmatically through the internet and ad networks. So just some things to be mindful of to stay away from in general. Obviously, you don't want to create a marketing strategy where you want to have an intended audience of children under 13, and then a large part of that marketing strategy is to buy media on Snapchat. Obviously, that would not be, not only would it be in violation of Snap's terms of service, because children under 13 should not be going to the platform, but it would probably be a slight waste of your marketing dollars. So these are just really the types of things that you need to think about when you're devising campaigns for children's products. Next slide, please. And then this is just a brief summary of some of the overarching topics to think about. I think David and Kate really touched on a lot of these points. David talked a lot about privacy by design. It doesn't end at that design phase. I think if we, he talked about safety by design. I threw in privacy by design here. I think they are different things, but there is overlap between the two. We can kind of think of the two hand in hand, although I would say safety probably encompasses a bit more. And the point of it really is you have to be involved from the start, from the early conversations. David made a comment that, his role in this is not to be a policeman, but rather to be a resource and a part of the team in trying to help sort through some of these challenges. And I think very often compliance, privacy, legal tend to get pigeonholed in these sort of police roles, because they have to, very often provide tough answers like no, or let's think of another way we can do this. but it's critically important to remember that, you know, everyone is at the end of the day hopefully on the same side within your organization, and that you are striving for the same goals. So it's important to make sure that you're collaborating with one another and that you're leveraging everyone you're working with internally as a team member, right? So that means, you know, marketing people should be working with legal should be working with compliance, and you should all be talking to one another, your product development folks, etc. Um, in addition to having privacy and safety by design protocol and policies in place, I'm a firm believer of also having your own sort of community standards or internal policies. And these are really sort of guidelines by which you would follow internally within your organization when coming up with programs like this or campaigns or new products, right? You should have your own set of principles that stay true to your brand, your mission, your company, that you adhere to through all of those processes. And of course, look to your self-regulatory guidance. Look to your organizations that are there to help you. CARU, Donna, don't kill me, but you know, I would encourage you guys, if you have trouble interpreting guidelines, to reach out to these organizations that you participate in and work with them on how you can get some guidance. You know, they probably are not in a position to offer you legal advice, but you know, they may be able to sort of point you in the right direction on where to look or how to think about certain things. Again, engage your colleagues. We talked about that a little bit. And then finally, just to wrap up, you know, remember, be responsible, be appropriate. We all have sort of a duty to keep children safe. We all, you know, I think we all should have an interest in trying to educate them as well and encourage them to, you know, be active in the internet, just how to do so in a responsible way, how they can keep themselves safe as well. And, you know, we should do our part as brands and marketers, and think about all of those things before we launch products into real life. And with that, I think I am going to throw it back to Kate.
Yeah, we're gonna have a bit of a panel discussion now. So if you prepared questions, and then again, if you have any others, please put them in chat, and Donna can bring them to the group here. But the first is, you know, we can't ignore pandemic times here, and given families' lives have really been turned upside down. Has there been any changes in your teams, whether it's product consideration processes or things that you're thinking about when it comes to kind of how usage has changed in the pandemic?
I could jump in there from, you know, first of all, Snap process-wise, it's been interesting because we were pretty well suited to this like distributed, remote, virtual review process. You know, even pre-pandemic, I was, you know, on a daily basis, I'd be working with engineering and product teams in different places, you know, whether it's Seattle or London. So we had gotten used to having to, like, to some extent already having this virtual interchange. So pretty much from like day one of this work from home mode, it didn't feel like so different. And I've actually been pleasantly surprised by the, you know, the level and the quality of these conversations, you know, with the people I would normally see in person. But you know, a lot of times when making these safety decisions, like, you know, kind of the theme of this discussion so far has been like, you know, sometimes it's not what is the, you know, the legal requirement, but what is kind of right, what doesn't feel creepy, what's for the best interest of our users. And those conversations aren't just like one and done, or, oh, here's the answer, let me point you to this language. It's very much a back and forth, and you know, my style is definitely to let it kind of simmer over time, and you know, the conversation might take a few iterations. So I have been pleasantly surprised how at least by way of process, it's been very smooth. But I also think, as I said, you know, we had that kind of infrastructure and culture in place before the pandemic anyway, of virtually connecting and all that.
Yeah, cool. Anything to add, Rachel?
Yeah, I would echo that. You know, I think anyone who's worked in sort of a global role and has had to interact with folks around the world has sort of already had a taste of video chat and figuring out time zones and working remotely, and how do you sort of connect even though you're far away. And we haven't had too much of a disruption aside from when they're working on my internet cable outside, but otherwise we also have been very fortunate. I would agree with David that sometimes now, in addition to all of the added technology we have to work through, I think there are all kinds of other pressures on us as well, right? Having family in the house right around us, animals, pets, the whole thing. And it just sometimes could add to the stress level. But so I think that point about having conversations simmer for a day or two and just being patient is a really good one, and is one that I think would serve most people well to remember. Is we're just kind of all dealing with some new pressures. And look, even marketers, right, and toy manufacturers, and even the kids, and dealing with going back to school. It's a whole new world for them as well. So just be patient.
Yeah, one of the topics that came with a lot of speed and momentum through the pandemic was thinking about what kind of mobile experiences kids were in. Of course, we always think about entertainment time, what videos are they watching, what games are they playing, but the big shift was, well, how are they being educated on mobile and digital platforms, and how do we think about like what's the right thing to do when a kid is in an educational mindset versus when they're in a play mindset. So that has been a really interesting topic to try to tackle as we're remote, and has needed a lot of simmering to think about it, and think about the balance between like thinking about the child and then thinking about the parent, as we're talking about, and having that like if you're a company and having a transparent relationship with a parent, but also then like educator, how does that factor in?
Yeah, I would say it's really difficult. I mean, I think especially if you think about, where parents were trying to limit screen time for kids, right? And now kids are on their computers or their devices all day, and parents are maybe in the next room on the same thing trying to work, and they can't make sure the kid is actually, in school or in class, or not clicking around on bad websites that are not for children, or where they shouldn't look, or even sitting in front of videos all day. There are bound to be videos that maybe are not appropriate. So my favorite are these super clever kids who have sort of hacked Zoom right away in their online learning classes, where they just put a picture of themselves, and really they're the teacher has no idea they're not there, right? So these kids are very clever, and I think we need to just remember that, and work with them on it, foster it. Don't try to shut them off from it, because then they're gonna look for the bad behavior, right?
Yeah, that relationship between engaging the user, the teen or the under 13, and then engaging parent, that's like a tricky balance to strike. What have you guys found in coaching your teams through balancing that? Any words of wisdom around that, or how do you factor them in both?
On my side, Snapchat is so interesting because, you have plenty of parents that don't either use it or understand it. So there's always that, like, we have, like I mentioned earlier, there's parent guides. And even if a parent is using it, their safety is also really important, which is an interesting one. Like sometimes we find that a parent's behavior online might not be that much more informed than their kids. So there's certainly a sensitivity to, like, thinking about minors in a different way and their unique safety considerations. But there's also awareness that many adults might have the same risk vectors too. So it actually makes it really complicated to parse out the different things. And in some ways it makes my job easier, which is like a lot of times, at least with Snap products, whatever the age of the user, the answer is usually the same. Like, there are exceptions to that, but the kind of universality of safety is something that always surprises me. And then, we have done things in the recent past. We had been working on this pre-pandemic, but it's even more relevant now. And you could see some of the press around it. It's Here For You. So these are search results that we partnered with organizations related to different types of mental health and user well-being. And, there's an eye towards tailoring that content to younger users. So that's an example where, like, if we can't, oftentimes we can't totally control what the parent's level of understanding is or how much involvement they are having with their kids, even if the kids are in the house. So a Here For You example is where it's like, let's go direct to that user, provide them those resources, try to provide them in the right context, work with experts outside. So it's an interesting balance of obviously the parent relationship in all of this is essential. And, we always encourage them to understand what's going on to the best of their ability, but we also have other defaults.
Yeah, that's maybe like a design trap or that we've seen some companies get into, is that they assume that parent is right next to child. And so, like, even building a consent flow, they say, oh, then the kid will just hand their phone and then the parent will hand it back. I mean, kids are so autonomous on their devices at such an early age that might be a flow that you could design for when they're 4, 5, 6, but certainly when they get to 8, 9, 10, 11, they don't want to hand over a phone to parent. And so getting that design right and for a micro age has been something really interesting to examine and try to get right. Rachel, any other things on parent and child?
No, I think we've probably seen the same thing, and I actually had experience with some of those campaigns from several years ago. I haven't been asked about them too much recently, but I do strictly recall having that exact conversation where the marketing team wanted to have this sort of like parent and child co-experience, which, I think is a great idea. You just have to think about how is that going to realistically work. And Kate, I think you just described some of the challenges with that, right? It could be appropriate for certain age groups, but then, as kids get a little more independent and more mature, they want to do things on their own. And we just sat with the team and I said, well, practically, how do you think that's going to work, right? Do you envision the kids sitting there with their phone and then handing it over to their parent? And that was the idea. And we kind of just went back and forth about saying, do you think that's a realistic thing? Do you think it's going to work? And, look, we can try it. And if we're not getting the response we want, we try something else. And, I think as long as you're open-minded and flexible about some of these things, you could find that sort of sweet spot on what works for you and your brand.
But we had 2 other questions that we'll get to here. And one is about sort of like evolution of regulation and where are things going when it comes to youth and data privacy. And I guess the big question is, do you think that this space is going to get more regulated? And if you think it is, how can teams future-proof themselves for the changes that are maybe likely to come, even if we don't know what the changes are?
I mean, I would certainly not be surprised if we see more regulation coming in this space. I think the CCPA is actually an example of where we might continue to see that happening. Obviously we have COPPA. We've got self-regulatory guidelines, safety guidelines. I think, CCPA now kind of brings it above that under a 13 threshold. And even though verifiable parental consent is not required for the ages of 13 to 16, what is required is opt-in consent, right? So a slightly different standard, but still not always an easy one for marketers to meet, right? From thinking from a marketing perspective. So I do think we could expect to see more regulation coming. I do think we could expect to see some changes in the regulation we already have. But what I would recommend is kind of stay true to those guiding principles, right? Just because I can doesn't mean I should. Is this something I would feel comfortable with my own child? Would I be embarrassed to tell my mother about this type of thing? Kind of around those esoteric standards, like the creepy factor, but sure enough, they work, right? And sometimes we don't always have a line in the sand on which side is right. But what we can do is we could at least start to figure out if we would be comfortable with that personally, right? And maybe that's also not always the best barometer, but it's what we have to work with. So, and I would also just just encourage you again, reach out to the groups that are available to you for help and guidance, and just have a dialogue.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I if we look globally, you look at GDPR, and there's different considerations for under 16s, and as we see kind of more and more countries adopting GDPR-esque privacy laws, I could certainly envision a world where there's going to be more focus and carve-outs and different types of considerations for younger users. And also just, if we see the regulatory actions, even that the FTC has taken recently, I could imagine that will continue, if not pick up. But yeah, I think that there is an interesting decision, so at a company like Snap where where it's over 13, so for GDPR, to what extent is it going to be a different experience for either different types of users based on geography or age? And I think thinking through, that stuff, even very early on, is a type of future proofing, because I see more kind of bifurcation coming, and from our GDPR experience, it has been super helpful because if another country comes out with that type of law or those types of considerations, we already have that kind of internal infrastructure that we can adjust it to. So I think that, depending, of course, on the company and the product, but thinking through, is this global? Is the experience going to be different depending on jurisdiction? Is an interesting one.
Yeah, we'd love to see every organization have like a chief children's officer, someone whose job it is, especially if they don't have exquisite lawyers like you do, have someone it's their job to sort of not predict the future, but just say, here's what things we could be doing now to put processes in place or things in place as things change. We're keeping an eye on like the age appropriate design code in the UK, which is interesting because it's a regulation not about data collection and data use. And now it's a regulation about what is the kind of user experience that's appropriate for kids. And I'll be curious to see how that might come over the pond and inspire some of our regulators here too, to look at similar things. So yeah, I agree that we think it's going to become more regulated. And that evolving regulation is often one of the things that scares entrepreneurs and innovators and even big companies that have a lot to lose to sort of invest in a youth audience. And so, it's like one of those things that is often like a Mythbusters episode where, you just like, everybody's running around and saying like, no kids, or like, oh, I didn't even think you could advertise to kids. Like those are myths that we often have to go in and bust. And this the regulators are coming is another sort of myth to be busted in some ways. Are there other things that you think are myths that should be busted when it comes to building mobile experiences or accounting for youth in marketing or in development?
I think a myth is one that you busted early on, that kids don't have phones or devices that are theirs, right? My nieces and nephews, probably the oldest one is probably 10. None of them have phones of their own, but I'd imagine once they go back to school, and who knows when, they'll probably start to nag for them. And there could be all different kinds of reasons why kids are getting devices younger and younger. Maybe it's safety, maybe they travel to and from school alone, whatever the reason might be. But to that end, I think we just need to constantly be mindful that kids are not only experiencing the internet on a desktop computer, they're also on tablets and phones, and they're smart, and they'll get around those, and any sort of locking software or things like that. Heck, kids can even at times figure out how to get around verifiable parental consent if they're crafty enough, right? So we just need to be mindful. Again, I think that it's really a role for everyone to kind of pitch in and help when it comes to kid safety and determining, really what's okay and what's not okay. But
yeah, I don't see this at Snap, but I think a myth could be that designing for privacy or safety, designing with privacy and safety in mind, could actually it goes against the general product or growth or business interests. I like am a real believer that at the end of the day, that user trust that is engendered when you fight for that user privacy and safety is what helps grow the business in a healthy way. So you could have, you know, something that's real speedy growth that's built on a weaker foundation of trust, and I don't believe that is how you grow a product for the long run. So internally I'm such a zealous advocate for the well-being of our users with our product teams, and it's nice to see that often it aligns with the long-term product vision anyway. So I think that's a good myth to fight, which is like they're not opposing goals. I think safety and privacy flow really well into growth and just building an exciting product.
Great. Donna, did we have any questions from the audience?
No questions from the audience, but we have 3 minutes left. So I do want to toss one question out to you all. You didn't know this was coming, so if you don't have an answer prepared, it's okay. But in light of our next session, which is Copley Forever, Ever After, we're talking about what's happening with CAPA. I'd be curious to know if any of you either have predictions about what will happen in the CAPA rule review, what you would like to see changed in the upcoming CAPA rule review, what maybe something should be removed, changed. Any thoughts? And William, while we're having this conversation, you can go back to the pull up the PowerPoint. I'll toss it to anybody. Kate, I know you have thoughts.
Yeah. I think one of the things that has seemed maybe a little bit unfair about CAPA and CAPA enforcement is that it's been so one-sided in the ecosystem. Like the creators and the publishers and the developers have borne all the burden of safety, when a lot of the money that flows in to pay them for their content equally has obligations in keeping kids safe. And so I'll say the advertisers need to have some, I think, more specific guidance on what they need to uphold, especially when they actually do intend to reach kids, and that it's not just all falling onto the plate of the creator. I think that would make a more balanced feeling towards CAPA. I'd also like to see, a bit more savviness on emerging technologies and emerging platforms and how they're protected. So, I think, IoT anecdotally, but there's also, how do we think about how kids' data is being collected out of smart televisions, or and how that data is all connected together for ways that maybe aren't even are a couple leaps further than what maybe the regulators who aren't very close to the ad ecosystem understand. So I'd love to see some modernization and some future proofing when it comes to platforms as well.
Right, I agree. I think that there needs to be more accountability across the ecosystem, and not just, weigh heavily on the developers and the content creators. And I think we've been asking for that for some time. And I think that with regards to IoT, I suspect and hope that possibly the FTC will take a second look at some of the guidance they've provided with regards to the collection of children's audio on in-home devices. The conversation whether or not, okay, a parent bought it, but what does that mean about the actual collection? Who's collecting it? Who's seeing it? Who's sharing it? The retention, things like that. So I'll be curious to see where they go from there. Rachel or David, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add.
I completely agree with all of that. More even and fair accountability, I think, across the ecosystem. It goes back to some of the stuff I was saying, we all have a hand to play in this. And I like the inclusion of the IoT devices. I see a lot of really bizarre smart devices for kids, like a smart rubber ducky, which I'm not really sure what it does or how it's smart, and it makes me a little nervous actually. But I'd also like to see consideration for things like machine learning and artificial intelligence. I feel like that's the next wave after IoT, and if we're going to think about future proofing a lot of this, the changes to the regulation, we would be remiss without talking about AI and machine learning.
Right, and I don't think you can welcome new technology, which is what the FTC has been saying for the last 20 years with regards to CAPA, is,
Exactly.
They welcome innovation. So we've got to allow a little wiggle room for that as well.
Exactly.
And welcoming some innovation on consent methods. The facts needs to be
People aren't faxing anymore. They're not doing the faxing forms anymore.
Banks make you fax. You
Come
still
on.
have to fax banks.
David, you get the last word.
Awesome. So obviously very hard to predict where everything's going to land, but we brought up the ICO age appropriate design code, and we see like what the e-safety commissioner is doing in Australia. Those things really resonate. I would love to see some type of something more along that vibe that goes with COPPA. You know, a lot of times it feels like we're just, we're waiting. What's this? Oh, what's this regulatory action? How do we interpret? Like, it'd be really great if there's, some principle-based framework that we start to center around, and I think it's more constructive. And we've spent a ton of time on the ICO age appropriate design code and e-safety commissioner in Australia, and I'd really I think a lot of that could be ported over into the US framework as well. I think it would be awesome.
Great. So thank you all. I appreciate you, David, Kate, and Rachel, for joining us today. I appreciate your insights. As you saw in the previous slide, CARU and BBB National Programs are hosting a kidvertising event in November, which will highlight not just our upcoming revision to the CARU guidelines, but really how to stay out of the crosshairs of a CARU investigation, how we do our investigations, both on a privacy and advertising side. And our next CARU conference session is, as I said, Copley Ever After on Tuesday, September 22nd, same bat time, same bat channel. I appreciate everybody tuning in and joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you all next month. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.